Before the French and Indian War, the colonies felt upset about how they had been getting treated by Great Britain. But after the war, the colonies were shortly satisfied with being able to have more land. What was more important, though, was that the colonies felt more politically united than ever. This is when the join or die slogan came to be. As the colonies were growing in size and power, they became a very important focus for King George III, the King of Great Britain. To try to prevent the colonies from growing too quickly, he banned all westward expansion in the Americas. He then created the Stamp Act without letting the colonies' parliament vote on the issue. Because the colonies felt as if they were being taxed without proper representation, they refused to pay these taxes. Many new taxes were created, including the tea tax. This ended up with the Tea Party, where protesters threw tea into the Atlantic. Britain responded to these protests by removing any form of independence from Massachusetts. The colonies then created the First Continental Congress to give out lists of rights and grievances. With Britain not obligating to step down, the colonies created the Second Continental Congress, where they discussed plans on how to protect themselves from Britain. It wasn't just the colonist politicians that were fed up. The people living in the colonies were also fed up and protested Britain daily. As George Washington was appointed as general by Congress, the battles of Lexington and Concord kicked off the War of Independence on April 19, 1775. On July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress declared independence from Great Britain. The declaration reads as so: the unanimous declaration of the 13 states of America, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which they have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to tell them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established will not be charged for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shewn that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessary which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent shall be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with mainly firmness his invasions of the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing legal powers. He has made judges depend on his will alone for the tenure of these offices and the amount and payment of these salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of a superior of the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a legal foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for many murders which they should submit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our characters, establishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, dissolution, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitations of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant, is unfit to be the ruler for a free people. Nor have we been waiting and attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conquered them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must, therefore, which denounces our separation, and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war and peace friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America and General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all alliance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. 1776 also saw the beginning of major military operations like the New York and New Jersey campaign. Washington crossed the Delaware River to lead his army into victories. The British attempted to take Albany, New York, but Washington's army was able to defend, with proving to the world that Washington could lead an army of rebels to defeat the most powerful military in the world. The Netherlands, France, and Spain began to provide wartime resources to the colonies to help in their independence. With losing to the north, the British began to put most of its efforts on the south. Here they were able to take Savannah, Georgia in 1778, but was reclaimed by the rebels 3 years later. On October 19, 1781, the British surrendered in Yorktown, Virginia. Now the once oppressed colonies could comfortably claim their independence from Britain. On September 3, 1783, the colonies and Britain signed the Treaty of Paris, giving the colonies full independence from Britain. On January 14, 1784, this treaty was recognized by the American Congress. The Articles of Confederation were passed to create a new central government. With the shock of war and the creation of a federal government that had power over the state governments, the economy began to decline. As the United States began to expand westward, they found themselves at war with many Native American tribes and confederations. Ultimately, the United States would come to win these wars. This is where history began to see a newly free nation oppress smaller independent nations around it. It does need to be recognized that it was not heavily protested against due to a lot of Native American tribes being more oppressive on their people than the United States was on theirs.